This is a discussion about the pathology associated with myocardial events. And so one of the first things we're going to talk about here is just basically how a myocardial event occurs. Typically, it's going to start with something called an angina or an angina, however you want to word it. But basically what this is there's three kinds of angina or angina that I'm going to be talking about. One type is associated with atherosclerotic plaques that build up, and the other one is associated with a vasospasm. Okay, so I'm kind of divided like this. This is the vasospasm one, and they have a word for it. They call it a Prinzmetal angina. Okay, so this is a blood vessel that's going into the heart, drawn as a circle here, and essentially what happens is with a Prinzmetal angina, this thing just randomly will squeeze down, and you have to give the person like a calcium blocker or nitrous oxide or something like that to cause this to open up again and relax. Okay, the other kind is associated with an atherosclerotic plaque, which basically means someone had atherosclerosis and it builds up and you get this little fibrous cap over the top of it. And when this thing gets so big that it's occluding more than 70% of the blood flow into the heart, that's an insufficient amount of oxygenated blood going to the heart to allow the heart to do its job with any sort of exertion at all. So as soon as this person walks up a flight of stairs, they'll start getting this chest pain. Now they call it a stable angina when the fibrous cap hasn't ruptured and formed a thrombus, and when this chest pain goes away when they start relaxing, and it doesn't last for more than 20 minutes. Because after 20 minutes of your heart not getting enough oxygen, things start dying. Okay, initially, the mitochondria will swell and things like that, but it takes a little over 20 minutes for them to actually die and break down, the whole thing to happen. So I'm dividing this between a stable angina and an unstable angina. Okay, stable angina relieved with rest or nitrous oxide or whatever, nitric oxide, and stable, this atherosclerotic plaque has not ruptured and the thrombus has not formed. Unstable, this puppy's ruptured and this is totally big time. This can lead to a thrombus that'll cause a myocardial infarction in a second. The person rests, doesn't go away. This is a bad deal, but it's still reversible damage, because it doesn't necessarily last for more than 20 minutes. You can relieve it with nitrous oxide or whatever. Now, if this completely becomes obstructed, now we're going into a new domain, the domain of myocardial infarctions. And there are different types. There are myocardial infarctions that are subdural, and there are myocardial infarctions that are transmural. So let me kind of break that up in here. So basically, I just want to make sure I had the word subdural right, because for some reason I'm thinking maybe it's subendothelial. I can't remember. Subendocardial. Transmural. Here it is. Transmural versus non-transmural or subendocardial. I apologize for that mistake. I recognize that I said that wrong. So there's myocardial infarctions. There is transmural versus subendocardial or non-transmural. Sometimes they call the transmural Q wave versus non-Q wave, but I'll divide it out here. So you have transmural versus subendocardial. Okay, here's the big difference here. Okay, so first of all, let's figure out what this is talking about. You look in the heart, you've got three layers in the heart. You've got a layer on the inside, a layer in the middle, and a layer on the outside. A layer in the middle is the myocardium. layer on the inside is endocardium, layer on the outside is epichondrium. So if it's transmural, it means it's an infarction that breaches all three of those layers. Okay? All three layers are infarcted. They become so ischemic that the tissue has died. Total blockage. Okay? Subendocardial, on the other hand, is a situation where, so remember you have the endocardium, you have the myocardium, and then you have the epicardium. This is subendocardial, which means it's just underneath the endocardium. Okay? Endocardium, myocardium, epicardium. So you need to understand why would this happen versus this. It has to do with essentially how the block is occurring, or I'll explain. Okay? So in this instance, this is something where, in general, the heart is not getting enough blood, whether it's from just in general, the person's in shock. Okay, so let's say they're in shock, so they don't have enough blood going to their heart. Well, the last layer of the heart to really get oxygenated blood, I'll put it this way. There's a blood vessel coming along like this, and everything right around that blood vessel is going to get some oxygen. A little further away gets less oxygen, and really far away gets even less oxygen. Okay, so the epicardium gets lots of oxygenated blood. The myocardium gets less than the epicardium, but still more than the endocardium, and the endocardium gets the least amount. So if a person's in hypovolemic shock, there's blood passing through here. There's not like a total obstruction of it. There's still blood passing through, and it's enough blood to supply the epicardium and the myocardium, but it's not quite enough to supply this endocardium, or just underneath the endocardium. And so this area down here in the subendocardial layer becomes infarcted. Okay? It doesn't get enough oxygen, becomes ischemic, and the tissues die. All right? So that's subendocardial. Now let's compare that to transmural. What would cause the whole thing to become damaged? Well, in this case, this is an instance where an entire blood vessel has been damaged. And there are typically three blood vessels that are going to be affected here. So let's draw a little heart like this. Okay, and down here we have, there's the apex, whatever. We have the left anterior descending, and then over here we have the left circumflex, and then over here we have this is kind of coming off of the aorta. I should have drawn that, so here's the aorta is coming. And over here we have the right coronary artery. So transmural is where, drawing this heart again, the different layers of the heart from the inside to the outside. Transmural is where the entire blood vessel is totally blocked off, which means this whole area is not getting any blood at all. It's not just, there's blood coming through, but it's not quite enough oxygenated blood to supply the tissue. This is where the whole area, so everything supplied by the left anterior descending, dies. All three layers die. Okay, and and you can actually know where this is occurring based on which blood vessel has been affected. So let me draw out here kind of a slice of heart, and we'll kind of pick apart the pieces. So here we have, just draw it like this. So we have our left ventricle, right ventricle. Okay, so what if it's an instance of and I believe this is anterior. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, but yeah. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. The heart's kind of tilted forward, but anyway. So in the instance of the left anterior descending, which is be right here. So if the left anterior, because we got three blood vessels, right? We have the left anterior descending, and then we have the left circumflex, however you want to write that, and then we have the right anterior. or the right coronary artery, excuse me. So right coronary artery. So left ventricle, right ventricle. Okay, so if this one's affected, well, what area is going to die? This area is going to die. Okay. If this one's affected, what area is going to die? Well, this area is going to die. And if this one's affected, what area is going to die? Well, this area is going to die. It's really pretty straightforward as to how you pick this out. But that's the general consensus here. Now, in the instance of something like this, it could be that all three of them, but they're not totally blocked off. They're not totally blacked out. They're just like way diminished. So there's blood coming through, but it's just not quite enough to get down to this bottom layer and supply it. And so just this bottom layer, dies. And it could be all three of them are decreased like this, and so then the whole myocardium could die like that. So you can kind of see how this would have its different effects. So that's kind of a breakdown between this. But now let's talk about this all on a concept of time. How much time does a person have? So a person first has this this block off, this thrombus or whatever maybe caused it. Maybe they're in shock. How much time before this tissue actually starts to die and become start necrosing and that sort of thing? It looks like this. Oh, I probably should actually make one more note and say, I don't know. You could figure out as well the EKG changes based on what blood vessel is messed up. So, for example, left anterior descending, that's the most common one, by the way. Remember where that is, left anterior descending. I won't draw it out again, but you could that if you look at an EKG, you'd see EKG changes on V2, V3, and V4. If it's in the anterior septal area, you can kind of break that down. I won't go into that right now, but I will go into this timeline. So we're talking on the scale of 1 hour and a day and a month, a week. I guess I'll put a week in here, and 1 month. Okay. Now, what's happening over this whole period? So it's not even really an hour. It really actually only takes over 20 minutes for cells to start dying. So within 20 to 40 minutes, you have to sneeze. Excuse me. Whew. Within 20 to 40 minutes, so before an hour has even passed, we have myocyte death. These muscle cells, they've died. They're gone. Irreversible damage. Now, when myocytes start to die, remember all the electrical conductance of the heart travels through these myocytes in relation to each other. And so if some of them are dead, the rhythm of the heart is going to be disrupted. And so right away, you're going to, with myocyte death, you're going to see arrhythmias as soon as they start dying. And as well as arrhythmias, you've got to recognize too, there's papillary muscles that are basically preventing some of these valves from regurgitating, kind of like, or just, going back and letting blood flow back. They're holding it tight. So if some of these papillary muscles are not getting sufficient contraction or whatever, because they're dying, then you're going to start getting regurgitation as well, possibly, depending on where the infarction happens. Okay, so within 20-40 minutes, we've already got myocyte death, we've got arrhythmias, we've got regurgitation, the papillary muscles are affected, all that kind of stuff. Happens really quickly. Some of the fibers, muscle fibers can become wavy. They kind of lose up. The sarcolemma becomes disrupted. The mitochondria swell, and they become kind of amorphous densities, that sort of thing like that. This is all because in the process of this not getting oxygen, it couldn't undergo aerobic glycolysis. And so, it uses up all of its energy. And the mitochondria become damaged. When the mitochondria become damaged, they swell. And there's glycogen loss. And since there's no energy for this to continue contraction, the myofibrils aren't tight anymore because they're exhausted, and so the myofibrils relax. That all happens within the first 20 to 40 minutes. So now after that, now they've died. After 30 minutes, they're dead now, and the sarcolemma breaks apart. And after about a couple hours, after 30 minutes, somewhere between 4 hours, after this 4 hour point, it starts to change. It starts to get some actual physical changes. You could look at this, the gross feature, look at the heart, and the heart will be darkened. You'll see the healthy tissue, and next to it you'll see this dark heart tissue, and that's dead. That's dead cells. It turns dark for some reason. And what this is if you look under a light microscope, you'd see some early coagulation necrosis, and as well as some edema, some of the tissue, some of the fluids from the surrounding tissues have kind of portrayed the area that's kind of swollen, as well as hemorrhage, the blood vessels and things like that. When it's not all, it's blood's leaking in there. So that's within 4 to 12 hours. So right in here, 4 to 12 hours. Kind of going over again here, coagulation, necrosis. It's dark, got edema, all that stuff's going on. Hemorrhage. So then you've got 12 to 24 hours. This is in the first day or two, somewhere in here, somewhere between, or not day or two, first half a day to a day, somewhere in here, 12 to 24 hours. This is where it becomes more visible. You can actually see visibly coagulation necrosis. Before you could see it was dark, you could only see it under a light microscope, and now you can see it grossly. You can see, grossly means with your eyes. You can see the coagulation necrosis now after 12 to 24 hours. Okay, so also there's going to be, if you look under a light microscope, you'd see there's more coagulation necrosis, pycnosis of the nuclei, myocyte, hypereosinophilia, marginal contraction band necrosis, early neutrophilic infiltrate. That's the key thing to focus on here, okay? Remember, what's the first thing to arrive if there's some kind of death going on? The neutrophils. So these neutrophils are going to start showing up here between 12 and 24 hours. And what do the neutrophils do? They break stuff down. The stuff's dead. We got to chew it up and we got to get it out of here. It needs to get gone. So the neutrophils show up, somewhere. By the time the day has passed, the neutrophils are there. They're already breaking stuff up so they can get it out of there. And now that they know the neutrophils have showed up, after this first 24 hours, the tissue, like when you pus, it's just this kind of yellow pussy color because there's all the white blood cells there and they're kind of shooting things up, makes this nasty, disgusting pus. Well, that's what you get. Sorry for that disgusting description. Is it starts to look yellow. Just think, I think of it this way. There's neutrophils there. Neutrophils are making nasty, chewed up, dead tissue that has this yellow appearance. Maybe that's not accurately what's happening. That's the way I think of it. After the neutrophils come, you're going to get the pus, the yellow color. So it'd be kind of a yellow to tan sort of mottling appearance. Mottling, not modeling. You're going to get coagulation necrosis. If you were to look under this under the light microscope, you would see the cells have no nuclei. They're still there, but their nuclei are gone because these are dead cells. Also, you wouldn't see any striations in the muscle. The muscle cells. And as well as, there's going to continue to be more and more and more of these neutrophils in there. So remember, the neutrophils are still there. Neutrophils are kind of like, I believe it's like the first week. So still neutrophils there, still chewing stuff up. So now, it's been 1 to 3 days. Now we're getting into 3 to 7 days. This is kind of, after about a week, 3 to 7 days. Now we're talking macrophages. Macrophages take 3 to 7 days to show up. And macrophages are like the tanks, so the big guys. The neutrophils came in there and kind of broke things up. The macrophages, they're like the big dump trucks. They're just loading up all the dead debris and tissue. They're going to pick it up and they're going to haul it out of there. So now macrophages are eating this stuff away. And this is a dangerous period because you realize this is a really high pressure system. And it's dead and it's disrupted and it could rupture. So around this period, this 3 to 7 days, you need to really watch out for the possibility of a rupture occurring. But what are you going to see besides macrophages? Well, you're going to see dead neutrophils. The neutrophils have degranulated, and they're dead now. So lots of dead neutrophils. You're going to see disintegrating tissues like myofibrils, that sort of thing. And now moving on here, 7 to 10 days. 7 to 10. So now we're getting, week and beyond. Color, it's still very yellow. It's still yellow through all this. Yellow. But after 7 to 10 days, around the edge of the yellow starts to get this red border, okay? This red border is granulation tissue that's starting to show up, okay? So yellow with red border. Remember, when you get a scar and it gets that really red thing over the top of the scar? That's granulation tissue, okay? Now that's happening in your heart. It's like pre-scar stuff. So red border, granulation tissue. Okay? So that's now occurring. So you get the yellow on the inside, red on the outside with that scar. And macrophages, they're still there. They're still doing their job. They're still eating stuff, taking stuff away. And that continues on. Now we're going in from 10 days to 14 days. So 10 to 14 days. 10 to 14 days. Now it's turning from a yellow-red, yellow in the middle, red on the outside, to the thing becoming kind of this reddish-gray color now. Red-gray, okay? So things are really kind of rotting, getting taken away. Granulation tissue is really taking over. Just imagine what does a scar look like? When you get a rug burn or something, first it's really red, and after a while it kind of starts to turn this kind of gray color, reddish gray color. Same way with your heart. Granulation tissue is there. There's new blood vessels coming in, and there's starting to be some collagen deposition. That's what that gray color is. I'm guessing it's probably collagen. Collagen deposition. And there's also some new blood vessels. Blood vessels are sending in new things to repair the tissue and grow it back with a scar. So now after 2 to 8 weeks, so like 2 to 8 weeks, we're talking, 2 to 8 weeks. So we're talking like half a month to a month, or 2 months. Now it's gray and white, just like you'd imagine a scar to be. This is a really collagen impacted scar, and after that point, it's just going to continue back with. So let's make a quick review here. So in the very beginning here, when it's first injured, myocytes die, and then it starts to kind of get this sort of dark color because it's dead, and you get a little bit of coagulation necrosis in 4 to 12 hours. Then 12 to 24 hours, it's going to start. I'll go ahead and do this after so you can see specifically what's going on here. So you can kind of see the progression here. 20 to 40 minutes, arrhythmias, regurgitation. Then when you get on to, there we go. 20 to 40 minutes, arrhythmias, regurgitation. 4 to 12 hours, coagulation, necrosis, dark edema. 12 to 24 hours becomes grossly. you can see the coagulation and necrosis. You start to get the neutrophils coming in there at about a day, and then after a day, they stay there for 1 to 3 days, and up to 3 to 7 days, and then the macrophages come in at 3 to 7 days, and then you start the granulation tissue after a week. So really, if you were to just kind of divide this up, I would kind of do it like this. I would say, 1 hour, even though it's not quite an hour, not that much happens. But by the time that a day has passed, I'm seeing neutrophils. By the time a week has passed, I'm seeing macrophages. After a week, you're going to start seeing granulation tissue. And then after a month or so, you're going to start to see, or several weeks, you're going to start to see a scar. That's kind of the progression. Neutrophils, macrophages, granulation tissue, and a scar. And if you just kind of know how long it takes for those things to happen, it takes about a day or so for the neutrophils to show up. It takes about a week for the macrophages to show up. After a week, the granulation tissue starts to show up. 3 to 7 days is the macrophages. After a week's granulation tissue, and then after a couple weeks, you start to get a scar to form. So you just remember that order, you'll get it down pretty good. And there's one last thing I want to mention in this discussion, and that is the release of some biochemical markers that come out with all this. So you can actually look at somebody's blood, and you can kind of figure out when the person had a heart attack based on when certain levels of these markers are elevated or decreased. The first one that really gets released is troponin. And troponin is something that'll show up, really quickly, right off the bat. And if it's a really big myocardial infarction, there'll be a lot of troponin. And if it's a really small one, there won't be much troponin. Right after that, there's going to be CKMB. Now, one thing to recognize is that troponin goes high, and it'll stay high for days. You'll still have troponin you could have troponin in your system for a week, However, CKMB will go high, and then it'll go down pretty quick after like 2 days. So if you want to find out when did this person have a myocardial infarction, and they have high troponin and high CKMB, then okay, we're probably in the first day of this myocardial infarction. But if you see they have high troponin and their CKMB is gone, then you'd say, oh, well, maybe it's been, 3, 4 days, 4 or 5 days, because CKMB goes down after the first day. And so you kind of get a gauge of how long has it been since they've had a myocardial infarction, or if they've had a recurrent myocardial infarction. If they had one and then they had another one. So remember, troponin goes really big and it stays longer. Troponin, it's like a trooper, it stays for a long time. CKMB goes away after like a day. So again, recapping, if there's high troponin, the CKMB is not really present. It's been 3 or 4 days. But if the troponin is high and the CKMB is high, then it's still it's only been like a day or whatever. And that's about everything I want to cover for this video. I hope that's helpful.